Again, welcome to this session. We are, hopefully you're in the right place. This session is the conducting a comprehensive assets and needs assessment. Obviously, we're not going to go to every single thing we could talk about in a limited amount of time, but the hope is that we can give you at least some ideas of how to approach this. And I'm also going to give you a particular tool that you can use to help drive your work. So we'll talk more about that in a minute or two. Let me just let a few more people in here. And so for those, and I'm curious, just maybe by a show of, I don't know, Zoom hands, who had a chance to look at the 101 session before you joined us today? Okay. There's always that one or good, excellent. And if you didn't, it's fine. You still have time to take a look at it, afterwards or in between the sessions. It's fairly brief, but I want to just recommend it because a lot of what we are going to be talking about throughout the next few days is going to be built upon some of the concepts in that 101. And one of those core concepts is this idea that you need to build core capacities in community schools work. And the first one we're going to talk about, they're not, there's not like this is the most important one, they're all important. But we're starting with the comprehensiveness capacity. And again, this capacity assumes that there is a pretty broad view of who young people are, that they're not just brains walking into a school, but they are bodies with relationships and emotions and aspirations and the ability to express themselves. And we want to appreciate all of that and find ways to engage all of that in our work in community schools. But part of that is getting a better sense on who they are, what their needs are, where the opportunities are to engage them, what resources you have, and how we can better line those things up, and where you have gaps and where you need to go out and need to find some additional supports. So we're really going to drill down into, in particular, as you probably figured out, the needs assessment portion of this capacity. So for folks who just joined a little while ago, we did ask everyone to put in the chat box your name, role, and location. I'm going to try to peek at that as we go here as best I can, but it helps me to know, in particular, what it is you're looking for. And I think just looking at this, there's obviously people are really interested in understanding what the steps are to do a needs assessment, which is great. This is the right session for that, I think. And I think in one case, someone's doing it for the first time. So I think this is a really well-timed workshop if you're going to do this for the first time. But also, I'm going to probably say this again at some point. If it's not your first time doing this and you haven't done this in the last year, it's time to do it again. As you probably figured out, the world has changed pretty significantly in the last few months. And so everything we thought we understood before is completely turned on its head, and we have to make sure we are re-engaging with our people. Again, if this might be a good reminder about the kinds of things you might want to do as you approach doing a needs assessment. Okay, so few objectives here. We want to make sure everyone understands why bother with this thing? Like, what's the point? Are we just doing it to check off a box, or is there a real purpose here? But really contextualizing a needs assessment as being a tool for engagement and decision-making. I want to share with you the outlines of our needs and assets assessment toolkit, which you will be able to download. I'm going to give you a link in the chat in a little bit. It's also going to be available on the Hub platform after the session, so you'll be able to get it fully down there. We're going to do a little bit of practicing of understanding how we look at data, because there is certainly some data analysis that's required as part of this work. And then we're going to talk about how the needs assessment can also maybe help give governance structures in community schools or community school systems a little bit more focus. And so it could be a tool to also engage leaders and people who are driving decisions for schools and districts and communities. So I want to explore that. And I'm really hoping that we can get through the content fairly quickly enough to have a block of time at the end for Q&A and exchange across the entire group here. But as we're going, please feel free to unmute yourself or drop a note in the chat. I'll do my best to look at that as we go here, but it's a little hard. So if you really have a question, please unmute yourself, make sure you ask, and I'll also try to stop along the way as we go. Sound good? All right, hope everyone's had like their coffee this morning or afternoon, and like the caffeine is making its way into your bloodstream now, and you're ready to fully engage. Okay. So I'm gonna first do so here's a basic idea. We're gonna talk a little bit about theory, then we're gonna get into the tool itself and then do some Q&A. I wanna just remind folks, and I know there were at least one or two people who didn't get a chance to look at the video, the 101 video we did before, but this is something that we refer to quite a bit. It's called our developmental triangle, and I won't sort of redo that entire part of the video here, but I do just want to pick up on one piece of it, which is that, as far as I'm concerned, I've now been a part of the community schools field for about 17 years. And I've always been concerned about the conflation people have with community schools just being a bunch of programs thrown into a building. It's what I call random acts of programming. Like, that's always the danger, that we're just doing stuff because we've always done it, or because it's there, and because we have a school leader who doesn't know how to say no in some cases, right? And so sure, we'll do it. And the next thing you know, you got a lot of randomness going on in your school. That is not a community school. And so we talk about the programming that kind of lives around the three sides of this triangle. But I think what really defines a community school is what's happening at the vertices of the triangle, how those different pieces of this triangle are connected, the ways in which we connect instruction and enrichment and services that remove barriers to learning. How are we using a set of ideas and tools and processes to make really good decisions about which programs, for whom, at what dosage, and when is it time to change a program or say no? So we're going to sort of drill into that a little bit. And so, yes, programs are absolutely a part of what a community school is. And this is not meant to be a prescription here or a comprehensive list of programs. It's kind of an example of the kinds of programs you see in many community schools. And you'll notice that some of these are more child-centered and some are more adult-centered, right? So adult education, for example, kids transitioning out of school into a different system, perhaps in some cases, kids coming in with early childhood, in some cases, and in health, so pretty broad range. And the question becomes like, well, what are we going to do? Is it really true that every school gets the exact same set of programs? No. And again, for those who saw the 101 video, we use the metaphor of a community school as kind of like a smartphone, right? And I can probably almost guarantee that everybody in this workshop right now has some sort of a smartphone device near them. And even if they were all iPhones, they will not I can guarantee that there are no two phones that are configured exactly alike, right? A different set of apps, different set of uses for how you use your phone. And so there is this flexibility. It's more of a platform for things to happen. And one way that you make decisions about what should happen is by looking at what's happening at the vertices, which I like to call the strategic functions of a community school. They're a little bit harder to sort of point at and say, okay, now we're doing this particular function, right? The way a program might be a little bit easier to see and has a clear beginning, middle, and end. These are the things that we think have to be done on a fairly regular basis to drive the important decisions about which programs for whom and why. And are we seeing any real benefit as a result of working in this way? So there's lots on this slide. We're not going to get to all of it today, obviously. We're really going to focus on the needs assessment. But I want to make sure that as we go forward, you understand that this is one of several processes that we want to be doing in a community school. And in many cases, those other processes are going to feed they're going to be inputs to a needs assessment process. Okay, so let's talk more about that. So here's how we define what a needs assessment is, a needs assessment. It's a systematic process used to understand and create a profile of a community school's needs and resources that informs and drives decision-making. So a lot of words there. I think the point I want to highlight in this sort of brief-ish definition of what a needs assessment is is that it really should inform and drive something, right? We don't want to do this to say that we did it and then we ignore it. And I have to say, it happens fairly often that people will do these kinds of exercises, never share back what we learned, and never use the information to help sort of inform what happens next. So this really should be an action orientation. It is striking to me how many school communities have not figured out how to do this in a way that's authentic, and that really ends up becoming, essentially a tool for the school to move forward. And this might be partly why. So I'm gonna, here's a cartoon I've used quite a bit, which I really like a lot. And it's what could be, a decision-making body in a school. Let's say it's your school leadership team or something like that, right? And they've gathered together again, and they're going to try to figure out, all right, what are we doing as a school? We got a lot of work to do here. What are we going to do? And so you can see the gentleman on the left here is talking about, we got to get rid of the sugary drinks in the cafeteria. Excellent point. Like, I don't know about where your community is, but that's a real issue where we are in New York. And, it's a real problem. A lot of kids are obese, and we think sugary drinks have something to do with that. So yeah, let's talk about that. That's really important. Someone else talking about character education must be added to the curriculum, right? For sure. A lot of SEL action these days, which we're really excited about. Standards-based testing is better than normed reference testing. I'm not even exactly sure what that means, but it sounds really important. And we should probably give this person some time to express what we should do about that. Because, yeah, I mean, when you start talking about norms like that, we should pay attention, right? Parents are not adequately involved. I have not yet seen one school where people feel like we've nailed parent engagement, right? Everyone's kind of working on that. So thank you very much for bringing that up. Maybe we should bring that into our conversation about what we do next year. And then finally, on the right here, we have someone saying that, well, by law, all children must be above average, which, I started my career as a math teacher. That is actually mathematically impossible. But it's still a really good point. We should bring this up. We should think about how we can, look at student achievement. So, these are people who are really dedicated. Anybody want to unmute themselves and tell me what else you see going on here?
The student is crying out for help.
Yes. So what's happening for that student? What do you see there, Latanya?
Drowning and burning.
Yes, that's right. So we have a building that is simultaneously on fire and sinking. And we have people talking about sugary drinks in the cafeteria, right? So it's like funny, and then it's not. Because the fact is, I'm sure in all of the schools that you work with, there probably are some issues like this that are being ignored, right? There are these burning, sinking issues happening in your school community that we are not paying attention to. And why do you think that is? Like, what do you see playing out here during this meeting? Who wants, I mean, it's not a trick question. Just what do you think is, why are we ignoring that kid right now? What's not being ignored?
Everyone has their own agenda.
Thank you, Jennifer. That was Jennifer, right?
Yeah.
That's right. In the absence of having real information, right? The voices of young people and families and teachers and partners telling you this is what's really going on. In the absence of having that information, what ends up happening is that the individual agendas of people who are in power end up driving what happens, right? And this becomes a contest of positional authority, of politics, instead of, if again, for folks who saw the 101 video, instead of having kids at the center of the conversation, right? If we had kids in the center of the conversation and we're doing and had our ears on and we're listening to what's going on the ground, we would never even get to sugary drinks in the cafeteria, right? Now, this is obviously a pretty exaggerated image, right? But again, I do want to just encourage people at some point, just reflect on what are those sinking and burning issues that might be happening in my school that I'm not even aware of? And how would we uncover, and who are the people we need to engage to get better informed and make sure that we don't do the same mistake? And I want to be clear, these are all valid issues, right? Sugary drinks, like, I'm not saying that that's a bad thing to talk about, but let's make sure it's aligned with what's actually happening on the ground. This make sense? Great. So I'm going to actually, let's see, I'm going to try this. Again, we're all trying to figure out how to make this work in a virtual setting. I'm going to try to see if we can get um, a bunch of breakouts going on here. I'm going to try to get you all in a group of like 4 or 5. I'm going to ask you to talk about these questions here. As you're thinking about needs assessment, and I realize some folks are newer at this than others, but what's already in place? What seems to have worked in your experience if you have experience with this? And where are the challenges if you have experience with it? If you don't have any experience with it, like try to think about what you think the challenges might be, because I'm sure you have some good thoughts about that. That all make sense? Great. So let's see if we can make this work. I'm gonna try to send you all into just like a 4-minute breakout. Everyone try to get, make sure we make space for everyone to share a little bit about what they're thinking about. And then we'll come back and maybe hear from a few of the groups. So let's see here. Yeah, we're gonna do about 4 or 5 people per group. It's gonna be random. Might be nice to say who you are, just so everyone knows who you are as quickly as possible, and then try to get to some of these questions here. What's already in place, what seems to work, and what are the challenges? All right, here we go. Right. Welcome back, folks. I know the breakout room is always ruthless. Just cut you off in the middle of like you're about to drop some incredible information and then whoop, you're gone. So sorry about that.
Got to be quicker than that.
That's right. You got to get it in, get those talking points ready for your breakout rooms. Let's wait a few more people are making their way back. Nice to see you, Claire.
You as well.
Paige, nice to see you. Thanks for joining us. It's hard to see everybody. Nice to see folks that I recognize. Okay, welcome back, folks. A few more people are, I guess they're waiting every last drop of that breakout room before they want to come back, which is great. It's a good sign. Okay, so we're not gonna ask every group to respond. We don't have time for that, though I'm really curious. But maybe folks want to share, let's start with what works. Like, what are some things that you either said yourself or heard from your colleagues about what seems to work in doing a needs assessment? Just unmute yourself and let's hear from a few people.
What works for us, so I'm Elaine, I'm in Maryland, is that we have bi-weekly meetings with the administration. So that includes the principal, counselor, and like some supported staff.
Great. So you have a bi-weekly meeting and you're doing a needs assessment at every one of those meetings, or that's kind of a platform you use to do some of that work?
So that's the platform that we use to do that work.
Perfect.
Yeah.
That's the group that's going to, drive this process, get the information, do some processing. Fantastic. So having some structure helps. Very good. Who else? What else did you hear? What else you want to add?
Kind of similarly, someone in our group, I think her name's Jessica, was saying of like the importance of structure to assess, but also to make sure you have the structure to implement later. So like making sure you have the support there once you get the information of the needs of the school, like making sure you'll be able to actually implement those. And that was a good. Very good.
Yep. Excellent. Maybe here, one more from one other group maybe who wants to share what you guys talked about.
I guess I can talk about like the challenges. So I know that like the main challenge is, being new and not necessarily having a framework to work from. So essentially like starting from scratch, or if you've had previous experience with working at, other schools such as like middle schools or elementary schools, bringing that experience over into the current role that you're in, and kind of making sure that like you don't blur the lines. Those are definitely some of the challenges that we shared in our conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Dorothy. And I think you covered a few of the ones that we hear pretty often. It's actually striking to me how few school communities have like a established protocol for this. Like, it's kind of like depends on who's in charge at the time and who shows up and who cares about it. So, there are some things that many school and nonprofits really care a lot about and they put a lot of time into and are very kind of prescriptive about it. And some things not so much. And I feel like there's a little bit of hit or miss when it comes to need assessment. So for some people, it's like, okay, we believe in the concept, we don't know what to do here. And there's no clear guidance about what to do. So again, I'm going to try to hopefully give you something that you can at least riff off of if you don't take the whole thing. And it's a pretty big process the way we've set it up, but you don't have to do it all. And I'll talk more about that. What are some of the other challenges you guys talked about? What makes it hard? Why don't we do this more often?
So for us, I'm Chicago. My name's Imani. So for us, it's the power struggle. It's the LPA versus the administration, the parents versus other parents. It's this power struggle that keeps the politics is what it is inside of the actual school building that prevents us from actually assessing the needs and then implementing them.
Oh, that's interesting. Say a little bit more about that. So people don't want to talk about it or they don't want to move
So like my opinions block together, and then I work at Cameron Elementary. So it's kind of like a us versus them. There's no, it's hard for them to collaborate because it's like the principal's, that's top dog. That's his school. Don't tell him how to run his school. And he doesn't lean on us as much, but then that makes it, so it creates that power struggle. And then I have Latinx parents and African-American parents, they don't get along. So they don't want to collaborate on anything. So it's like this constant like power struggle that we're having. It's like a contest or whatever we're having, but our kids are in the middle and they're sinking.
Yeah.
And it's like it's a power struggle for us.
Well, I kind of like want to do an entire new workshop now based on what you just said. Can we just take a minute? Anyone have any advice for Imani? How might you anyone sort of face a similar kind of struggle? Either the administration saying like, you can't tell me what to do. I'm the boss here. I control and I make decisions. Allison, how would you approach that?
Well, I'm just wondering if the principal understands their role as a principal at a community school. I mean, a principal at a community school is all about collaborative leadership. You don't get to be the top dog, right? It's about, I mean, you are the principal, but it's about, having that shared equity and leadership. So I'm just wondering if the principal understands what his role is at a community school.
I have a leadership team meeting tonight, guys. I'm giving all this information.
Maybe you want to take Allison with you to that meeting, and she can let the principal know what his job should be. So obviously we're not going to solve that right here, Imani, but I do wonder if having additional information from a broader set of perspectives, if that might change people's minds about either we need to work better together, right? Like we have these sinking, burning issues going on in our school, right, and we're here having these conversations that have nothing to do with that. That's right. A problem. Or to the school leader, there is stuff that we can help you with, but we have to understand better what's going on before we can move that conversation forward. So, if you want, I'm happy to share that cartoon. I mean, it might be something that might sort of get people's thinking.
I think it might. I think that might be a good check-in question for us.
There you go. So, maybe you can email me or something like that. We can get that to you so you can have it tonight. Okay.
Thank you.
But maybe one or two other thoughts. What's the challenge? What's getting in the way? Why is this hard? Why don't we do this more often or use it more often? Anyone else want to weigh in?
I'll jump in.
Yeah.
This is Robin in
Robin.
Los Angeles. Hi there. One of the challenges with needs assessments I'm finding is that school, besides the pandemic and reaching folks, teachers, families are just overloaded with surveys. And they don't want to see one more survey. And then there's not this willingness to collaborate on one comprehensive survey across agencies, the school and the supporting agencies, and of course, community school director. Everybody's got a survey.
Yeah, I'm looking at my browser here. Someone just sent me something, I think from Chicago, that's exactly about that. Like, I am surveyed to death, right? And so there is this problem, and I have to say, I'm going to talk more about it in a minute. For some people, there has been this conflation that needs assessment equals survey. Like, that's what it is. A needs assessment is, we ask 10 questions, true, false, 1 through 5, indicate what you want in this predetermined list of choices that I decided for you.
Exactly.
And that's what the needs assessment looks like. And we're going to talk about why that's a problem. But you're right that there is this, particularly in communities of color, is my experience, low-income communities, we survey people to death. And two things don't happen after we survey them. We never tell them what we learned. Right? And we oftentimes ignore what we learned. Right? We just sort of, we did it, we moved on, and we're just going to keep on doing the inertia we were doing before. So there's a real danger here that if you keep on surveying people and not doing anything with it or even sharing it back, you're going to lose trust with your people, right? And I think we all know this strategy is built on trust. It moves at the speed of trust. So if we're going to move forward with this process of a needs assessment, let's be prepared to actually do it authentically, respectfully, right? And I hope everyone is already thinking about, how do I not only engage people as providing information to this, but they are also going to be the people that are going to work with us to take the information and move it into action together, right? So I'm so glad you added that, Robin. That's a really, really good point. And I'm sure you're going to get pushback from people who are like, here we go again. Hopefully it's going to be different this time. All right. Thank you all. And I'm sure there are many, many more things you guys talked about, but we don't have tons of time here. So I want to do one more piece around the sort of the conceptual work we need to do here, because there's a little bit of getting prepared for what this means, right? This is actually not a totally comfortable process, as we heard a little bit from people here, right? Both in terms of how it's experienced by our constituents, or even that there are some people who feel threatened by what a needs assessment might uncover, right? So it's not totally comfortable. We should be ready for that. But let's think about this from a very kind of conceptual point of view, right? What exactly are we trying to do here? So if you look at this Venn diagram here, we have a picture of what the current, let's say we do our needs assessment, we get a set of current needs, and then we have a bunch of things that we do, right? Remember the sides of the triangle, right? There's a lot of stuff that we're doing. Those are the provided services. And to make it really simple, we're trying to figure out how to make that sweet spot even sweeter, right? How do we get that sweet spot to be as large as possible, right? And what's exciting about this is that you're gonna find there are things, can you all see my cursor? There are things on the left side here. There are things that are going on, or there are needs that are happening for which you are currently not responding, right? Like right now, there are things that are not happening for kids and families and members of your school community. And that's actually kind of exciting because it's like, wow, now we're getting clear about how we can, direct some resources or mobilize what we have, maybe even find some partnerships to meet needs that aren't being met. That's awesome, right? That to me is super exciting. To get like, oh, there are the burning, sinking issues that we didn't know about, and now we know. That's good stuff, right? So one way you get that sweet spot bigger is by figuring out what these are and then identifying resources to meet them, right? This is where it gets a little bit trickier on the right side of this Venn diagram, because the fact is, let's see what this represents, is that there are things that are happening in your school community that are not meeting anybody's needs. So let that sink in, right? There are things that we are doing. There are people who have jobs, who show up every day, who are delivering stuff that nobody needs anymore. Maybe at one point they did, right? At one point it made a lot of sense. But inertia is a terrible thing. And we just keep on doing it and keep on doing it. And now we have a bunch of stuff we're doing. No one even fully understands what goes on in that program over there or who that person is. We're not sure if there's quality here. Oh, and this is a really important point. I want to emphasize this point, if nothing else. One of the dangers of a survey way of thinking about needs assessment is that surveys oftentimes do not address quality, right? They will say things like, do you want after school? Do you attend after school? Do you care about wellness services, right? But it doesn't say, and are you getting high quality services back, right? So quality is a need. We're not just checking off a box here that we have a set of programs in place. We want to make sure that they are effective. They're actually generating some impact for kids and families, right? So it's not so much like an inventory of what we have as it's a sort of matching up, are the needs around quality and a comprehensive view of kids, who they are, is all of that being considered? And if we have a crappy program, we are not meeting that need. Does that make sense? So that kind of crappy program might be in here. And by the way, sometimes crappy programs are crappy because they don't have the right environment, right? They don't get the meeting from the principal to figure out how they can be stronger. They're not getting the data that would help them better target what they can deliver to the right set of kids. They don't get the opportunity to get in front of families to explain, what they're trying to accomplish and how to engage the parents themselves directly in some of that work. So I'm not at all trying to castigate the service providers. I'm saying that there's something that's not quite right. And so one way that you move stuff that's in this part of the Venn diagram into that sweet spot, in some cases, it's just having conversations, talking about continuous improvement, understanding what their experience is of why things are or not working, and then committing to making those changes, right? In other cases, it's around alignment. And in the 101 video, we talk about how, this notion that, and I'm not trying to pick on after school, I love after school, but it happens often that there are people who kind of just show up at 3 o'clock running a program and have no idea what happened before and don't care to know what happened before, or care deeply but can't get the information. And so if a school knows that we're really struggling with literacy with the fourth graders, but we don't translate that information to the people who are running the programs. How are they going to be able to align their work if they can't get the information, right? They could infuse literacy into the work with fourth graders in after school, but there has to be a connection. There has to be some partnership. And so one way to think about the people over here, the things that are happening on this side of the chart, is continuous improvement, more alignment, better communication, a clear sense of what our shared results are that we care about, right? Getting on the same page about that stuff helps to address what's happening over here. That makes sense? And, and there are some programs that have to go. Like there are just some things that no matter what you do, it's no longer a fit. It doesn't make sense anymore. It may be that that provider has to provide a different set of supports, or maybe it's a different population. Like it can't all be saved by or changed by continuous improvement. Like you may find that it's time to rethink why we even have this program to begin with, right? So just be prepared for that. That's a kind of a painful conversation probably. It's not fun, but again, we're being child-centered here. And there's all this stuff over here that we're not doing. So if we're doing stuff over here that's not meeting a need, that's an opportunity cost. So let's keep that in mind, all right? And I see some folks are also writing on the chat here, which is great. Let's keep that going. That's wonderful. Appreciate that. Okay, so here is the components of this toolkit, and I'm gonna let's see if I can figure this out. I'm gonna oh, I just lost it. Hang on one second. I want to give you all the actual toolkit. Whoops. Oh, 1 second, folks. Sorry. It is. Here we go. Okay. I'm going to drop in the chat a link that which you don't have to open right now. I mean, I would download it. It's actually going to be a zip file because there are several pieces to the toolkit. As you can see here, these 8 steps, but that is a folder that has has actually a guiding document and all of the particular tools that you might reference and that are referenced in the overall outline for the toolkit. You don't have to look at it now. I'm going to sort of give you a few screenshots, help you understand how it all comes together. We don't have enough time to go through every single step, but I think it's pretty self-explanatory. I still want to give you a little bit of a voiceover about how we approach, in particular, some of the steps. So there are 8 steps here. I know that seems a little bit daunting, right? Like we got to do 8 things to pull this thing off. I only have a week to do this. By the way, if you only have a week, don't do this. You can't do it. It's impossible. This is going to take some more time than that, but there might be some pieces of it you can still work with. So I want to talk about each one of, not each, I want to sort of reference each one, but I want to dig a little bit deeper into some of these so we can get a little bit more, some more insights into how to approach it. This first step is so important. So important. This is not an individual sport. I want to be really clear about that. If you think that you're going to sit in your office or at home and write a needs assessment without talking to anybody else, that is not going to work. That is a complete waste of your time. Please, that is like malpractice. Do not do that, please, okay? This is a group sport, and we need some people. And I can't see her now, but person earlier who said that she has a bi-weekly meeting, and like, that's so important to have that kind of a structure in place, right? We need to get a group. Now, it could be an existing group. It could be more of an ad hoc kind of committee you pull together, but some sort of advisory council. Oh, by the way, anyone from Chicago in here? Chicago? So we actually developed this entire tool with Chicago about 10 years ago. We piloted with Chicago. So I want to thank Chicago for being our guinea pigs. Actually, no, I shouldn't say that. For being our leaders on this tool, okay? And it's been kind of refined a little bit over the years, but you know, Chicago really helped us conceptualize what this should look like. So thank you. And that's why the advisory council language really comes straight from Chicago's way of thinking about community schools. Anyway, but there has to be a group that's going to own this process. So that first step is really, really important. Do not skip over it. And there's a tool in here that helps you figure out like who's on my team. Do we have the right people? Do we have the right perspectives and skills? I think I might even have, yeah. So there's a worksheet here around building your team for this. It talks about what populations you might need, what skills they might need to bring. If you're doing a needs assessment and nobody, for example, likes data, we got a problem. If you're doing a needs assessment and you have a population of families that who are not native English speakers or do not speak it at all, and you need someone who has language skills, you should really think about that, right? That might be a good person to bring onto this team somehow. And then, thinking about where there are some other gaps that emerge in your analysis, and there's another tool here that helps you map out who you have and who you might want. Okay, so it could be a good tool for you to kind of think through what would be a really powerful team to drive this work. Okay, and then there is this self-assessment that I think that group should do to just think through, like, okay, where are we developmentally in terms of the 3 remaining capacities here? And then it'll just give you a place to track where people are at with this. It's a good sort of beginning to the process. Step 2 is what we call an archival data review. There is this mythology that you have to commission an entire study and get brand new sets of data to do this work. You do not. You will be getting some more information, but a really good starting point is to just say, what do we currently have? What's already out there that maybe is being ignored? What are the school reports that are being generated all the time? Are there some community needs assessments out there that might give us some ideas about what's happening in our neighborhoods? Whatever is as is, if it's as is, or can be manipulated slightly. And so the best example of that is thinking about attendance data. For a long time, attendance data was being looked at only as average daily. And now people have learned, well, if you look at it in terms of chronic absence, and that's the percentage of kids who've missed 10% or more, you get a whole new set of information by looking at it that way. So same data set, but just kind of looked at differently. And I'll talk more about that in a minute, actually. But this is a really important step. Like, what do we already have? Let's see if we can analyze and interpret what's already, happening right now, what we're already collecting. And when you do that, right, when you finally get to that point where you've collected all this information, I think you're going to find that there is this crazy dynamic that emerges from your analysis. And one is that a lot of people, let me ask the question. I feel like there are 2 kinds of people in this world. There are data lovers and data haters. Who are the data lovers? Let me see some hands. Okay, and it's okay, no shame in this. Who are the data haters? Okay, no shame in that, right? By the way, if you know you are a data hater, you better make sure you have data lovers on your team, right? Because you're going to need to have people who can look at that stuff and help you understand what's there. But here's my theory. I think there's perfect, Claire. Claire was never taught to appreciate its value. That is like the perfect segue here, right? So here's my theory about why people don't like data, why some people don't like data. It's because data is a hammer. Data has been used as a hammer, right? It is what helps to pick winners and losers. It's what you use to report back typically to funders or government agencies about what did or didn't happen. And so there's just this feeling of anxiety that is associated with, we're going to collect information and, oh my God, what's it going to say, right? Rosie's saying she doesn't hate data. She just likes the process of getting data and the amount that has to be shared with the powers that be, right? So it's not the numbers themselves, it's everything else that's associated with it. It's sort of the culture around our data is skewed, I think, right? And I think it's a data of hammers, right? Data is a hammer. It comes down on you hard, right? And it's only used in one way. You can't do a whole lot with a hammer, right? It's really good for nails, but that's about it. And I think what I'm hoping that we can do here, and then all of us can do collectively with our different communities, is rethink what our culture to data is, what our relationship with data is, moving it away from being a hammer to being a flashlight, right? How can data be a flashlight? So in addition to, look, we're never going to get away from it being used to pick winners and losers. It's just how the world works right now. But what can we add to that paradigm? And imagine if we use data, and I'm sure you do, if we could think about data being used for planning, right? So that even before we know what happened or didn't happen, how do we take the information we have and do a better job of understanding what we should do next, right? That's more flashlight. how do we use data to drive that improvement we were talking about before? Let's help that provider get better at their work. Well, one way to help improve is by measuring, making small changes, measuring, making small changes, and seeing what happens, right? And then also evaluating. And evaluate means to understand more than just to pick winners and losers. Like, what did we learn from this? How does it inform what we're doing? And you kind of get this cycle that happens where once you learn that stuff, it helps to inform your planning, you improve it. And now we're sort of using data in a different way. So I'm going to ask, this mostly because I know him, I want to pick on him. Terrence, do you want to say a little bit about what you posted here on the chat?
Thanks, Abe. Yeah. I guess I gotta, yeah. Yeah, it's something that I learned from that this notion that data is a driver of change, so that if you have numbers that you're working with, you know, real or imaginary, that now you can make decisions to pivot off of sort of how to proceed. And that's a dangerous fallacy, because what gets lost, it's like numbers don't lie, but people that use numbers can lie. So it's often not, it's not getting to something that you said earlier, Abe, about quality, and somebody else in the chat put that. There's a quality aspect that is often lost when you zero in and you drill down in numbers and data. So, and then you can become stuck, and that also is connected to whether or not the efficacy of particular programs is still relevant to what it is that you're trying to achieve in that community. So I think that there's some connection between that.
Yeah, thank you, Terrence. I'm really glad you added that. And, you know, I think that there is a phrase that we've all heard a million times of data-driven decision-making, right? And I think it's actually the wrong way to think about this. I think of it more as data-informed, people-driven decision-making, right? Like, we have to get people to look at what the data are saying. Like, the problem is not the data itself, it's who is doing the interpretation of the data. Who is making the decisions based on that interpretation? I don't think that's as democratic as we'd like to think it is. It's not. And a lot of times people who have the privilege of even receiving the information, that tends to be pretty rarefied air in too many places, including schools, right? So this in many ways becomes a process to get more people at the table to help figure out, wait, let's before we go too far ahead of this, let's define the problem as we understand it. The people closest to the problem are the closest to the solution, right? And those perspectives oftentimes are not heard enough. So part of you looking at this with a flashlight is who is holding the flashlight, right? Let's think about that. Who are the people that we are entrusting with making decisions about populations of children, some of whom they may not share a whole lot of understanding with or culture with or backgrounds with. So there's an opportunity here to get more voices to the table. So many, many thanks, Terrence, for bringing that up. And thanks for letting me pick on you as well. I want to give one, maybe two examples of how we want to think about data differently. So here's, and for those who've been to my sessions before, maybe you've seen this data set. I think I heard that Baltimore's in the house here. Is Baltimore here? Okay. So Baltimore, these are your data. This is from a way back when. This is a study where they looked at how kids scored back in fall of first grade on the verbal CAT and how they scored in spring of fifth grade. Same kids over a period of time, right? And we have two lines here. The blue line are kids who are from a higher socioeconomic bracket. These kids are more wealthy. And the orange lines are kids who are less affluent and poor. And Allison, yes, we're going to put the toolkit on the Hub as well. It might take about a day or so to do that. Okay, so this is not a trick question. What do you see here? We're going to put on our data caps. We're going to do some analysis. Like, let's say we got these data. What do you see? Not a trick question. Just tell me what you see.
We see that the students who started in the lower socioeconomic environment started out lower, and that even though the trajectory does go up by spring, it is not equivalent to those in the higher socioeconomic environment or school.
Beautiful. Well said, Danielle. Thank you very much. So there's a gap early on, and there's still a gap later. Is the gap getting bigger or smaller over time?
It widens.
Right. So So I think we all agree we have a problem here, right? There's something going on here. We don't like, I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm going too far ahead of you. Do we like this? I don't think we do, right? There's something going on here we want to address.
Right.
Now, there are part of what, and for folks who are joining the logic model session tomorrow, I'm probably going to pick up maybe the exact same example here. There is sometimes a rush to think about, well, what we need to do here is, because this is a verbal cat, we have to respond with more verbal stuff. Like, let's give these kids some additional time on task, maybe, get them tutors, right? Maybe some additional prep. Maybe there's some missing pieces in their learning that we need to fill in, right? And that's all true, by the way. I'm not saying that's a bad idea. I guess what I want to suggest is that the only thing we can do here? Let's sort of think about this a little bit differently. So imagine we look at the same data here. We're going to look at now at every point the kids were tested. And you'll see that some other information sort of appears here, right? So I'm shading for you the school year. You shade the school year, look at the rate of learning for these two groups during the school year. Just during the school year, the rate of learning for these two groups is actually almost the same, right? So they're kind of starting in different places, but they're growing at pretty much the same rate. So the teachers are getting it done, right? This is not about teachers phoning it in or ignoring an entire group. Like, they're moving essentially at the same rate. And so if there is a widening gap at the end of 5th grade, what is actually going on here? What's also going on here, I should say. Who wants to just say it?
Are we talking, I'm sorry, if they're gonna, that widening gap can be because their socioeconomic shifts, so their poverty, whether the abuse that's happening on those things, those socially emotional things that are happening, they start to, as the kids get older, they're experiencing it more.
All of that is true. Absolutely right. And I want to highlight what Emily put down here. Look at summer. Look what happens in the summertime. Summer is between the shaded areas here. So during the summertime, these kids continue to somehow maintain their momentum. It's not a straight line, but these kids are regressing or flatlining during the summertime. So the notion that, and why is that? What's happening in the summertime for these kids up here? What are they doing?
Going to camps and stuff like that.
Going to camps, maybe traveling, back when we used to travel, remember those days? Maybe they live in environments where they have access to technology and literature and things that sort of engage them in different ways. And the kids, even though we're generalizing here, of course, the kids who have fewer resources may not have the same opportunities. And so a pretty legitimate response, in addition to, yes, let's understand where the gaps are academically and try to fill them. But summer would make a big difference here. Summer programming would make a big difference. We're talking about academic data leading to an analysis that lands at, we need more summer programming, right? That is a community school way of thinking. And not just going with what the data tells us right away. So to Terrence's point, who makes that determination? Who's interpreting these data? We got to think more holistically and get more people, because I can guarantee you that if there were youth development folks and summer and out of school time people who are part of that conversation, to be like, wait a minute, what's happening? Let's look at these kids, what's happening in summertime? There's an opportunity there. There's actually one more opportunity here. Who wants to call it out? There's something else that we could do. It's sort of off the chart, actually. It has to do with this over here. These kids are walking into your school and they're already behind. So part of my question is, what happened before they got to school? Early childhood is another opportunity here that we should be looking at, right? So this is just one set of data, archival data that you have. And look at us. We are already identifying that if we did more summer and more early childhood, that would help us get these kids what they deserve, right? And help to minimize this gap. I also cannot ever use a slide and not say this. It doesn't mean that the kids up top here are doing great, by the way, right? They too might need some additional supports, right? So this is about lifting all boats, but these kids here are gonna need even more, right? From an equity point of view. And so is that even more test prep? Or can it also be the kinds of normative experiences that these kids here of the resources already get because they have resources? That's part of what our work is in this strategy. This making sense? Great, thank you, Paige. Okay, so I'm gonna put you back in your breakout groups. I'm actually going to make them a little bit smaller now. I want you to think about, if you're thinking about your archival data, the data that you have access to right now, you don't have to commission a study, you can already download it right now. I want you to think about which of those, and many of them are going to be hammers, which of those could also become flashlights for you. So just talk in your groups about that. Just do a little bit of reflection. Maybe you already are doing some of this flashlight work, and so your colleagues will benefit from hearing your experience on that. But what are the hammers you have that can also turn into flashlights? Does that make sense? Great. So let me see if I can find, God, I have so many windows open. Here we go. We're gonna get you back into those groups. I'm sorry, I'm gonna make new groups, a little bit smaller. There we go. All right, see you soon. All right, welcome back. I'm sorry to do that again to you, but you know, this is our new normal. We'll give folks another minute. I guess they're making their way back now. Okay, welcome back, folks. I'd love to hear at least a couple examples of hammers that can be transformed into flashlights. So as people are making their way back, even if you want to drop them into the chat, that's great too. But I'd love to hear from at least one or two folks what you suggested or what you heard from your colleagues. Who wants to get us started here?
I'll go.
Thank you, Emily.
Our group, it was nice to look at just look at things with a broader scope and a broader lens, and like specifically the question, you know, you had the longitudinal data from this point, and so instead of just looking at the previous year to the next or the year before, but really looking at are there trends over time. And then even kind of meta-analysis, like breaking those down into the smaller groups, socioeconomic, cultural, language, things like that. So really insightful for a quick little breakout.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm sorry it's so quick. You know, this is the problem with limited time. But thank you for that. It's great. Yeah. So even just and I think it's important to get the group that you're going to pull together through this work to understand like this is going to maybe be different than how we normally look at and talk about data. So, you know, bring all of who you are to this conversation, right? Good. Who else wants to share? What do you guys talk about? Hammers and flashlights.
I'll share because my group just educated me the whole time. I'm not a data person, and so I had 3 awesome people sharing around. They were excited about data, and so things that popped out to me were like, you see a change, and so like what you just like you see that change, and you can point that change back to a bunch of different data points. So like, what is causing that change, and there's your data. And Shanta in my group shared about a process they're doing where she works. I think she said it was in Flint, that they are utilizing a smaller group of students and parents to meet about what questions they should be asking the larger group. So sometimes you're just asking the wrong questions when you're looking for data. And so they're utilizing that process to then determine what to ask. So yeah. It was a very helpful conversation.
Excellent. And you're going to find that this is actually kind of built into the process, is that when you're looking at your archival data, there will be people who will be like, huh, we don't have it, but man, that makes me think, what's happening with this? Or, you know, why don't we collect this piece of information? Or I wish we could ask people these other set of questions. So that's a good thing, because you might want to, you'll see in the next step here, it'll make its way into other parts of the tool, of the process. So I know Terrence wanted to share a brief story about data. So go ahead, Terrence.
Thanks, Abe, and I'll be brief. So sometimes when you work in public schools, sometimes people use the wrong tool for the wrong thing. So sometimes people use flashlights as hammers. So this is a story where they understood that the hammer they were using was actually a flashlight. And in New York City, there's something called parent-teacher surveys that are distributed to parents to, you know, just to really sort of engage them. And this is a sort of poor substitute for parent engagement. Anyway, the organization that I was working with at the time had miraculously achieved 100% completion of the parent-teacher survey. And when that happened, it was a watershed moment because the administration, and this is for those of you who have to find a way to bridge the gap with sort of the compliance-driven mindset, it was the moment that the principal finally had to listen to what we were saying, because just because they had 100% completion on the survey, there's no way they could say that they had parent engagement. So it wasn't a matter of, if we have the data, then we've demonstrated a shift in culture and in engagement and in relationship. So that was kind of the proof that we needed to begin to have a new conversation around what were some of the changes that needed to happen. So hopefully that's helpful for people.
That's very helpful. Thank you for adding that. And you know, it speaks to like, right, I think it's a really good example. I like the way you frame that. It's a flashlight kind of being used sort of as a hammer here. Because what if 100% of parents are saying, we don't feel engaged? Right? Like It's kind of ridiculous, but that's still being seen as the measure of engagement, right? So there's even the opportunity to look at the entire accountability framework that we've sort of put in front of schools and communities and partners, and hopefully say like, wait a minute, it's not adding up. This is not really the, the best intentions here, of course, usually. But like, it's not working out for us. This is not giving us the information that we need. What's actually in those evaluations? What are people actually saying? How do we interpret that in a way that leads to understanding how we move forward instead of saying we checked off a box? So I'm so glad you added that. It's great. So, of course, we're only at step 2 here. It's going to move a lot faster, I promise. But these are the kinds of, for me, the exciting kinds of interactions that end up showing up when you invite people to a process like this. So that's why that first step is really important, of having a team of people that's a broad representation of your stakeholders. And you start looking at what you already collect, you're going to start seeing other kinds of things emerge. And this is one of the tools. It kind of gives you a little bit of a prompt about the kinds of data you might want to look for that you already probably have. Is also a resource inventory. So what are the things that you have going on currently? What programs do you have? I want to be clear, I do not recommend making your needs assessment an inventory of all you're doing now and asking people if they like it. That is not a needs assessment, right? And that is, I think, I hate to say it, a really lazy approach to what this is supposed to be. Because if you're giving people a vote on what's already happening, you're not really changing a whole lot, right? There are things that we saw in that Venn diagram that we are not doing anything around. And there are things that we're doing that nobody wants anymore. So having it only based on a resource inventory is not a good idea, but you do need to know what's being offered currently, right? So that's why that's in the process. And then once you've done that, you've gathered all that stuff, you do that initial analysis. We sort of started talking about this a little bit, like what kinds of questions do we need to maybe explore a little bit further? How might those questions make their way into some surveys or interviews and focus groups? And more on that in a minute. And wow, there are some people that we haven't engaged yet in this work, and we need to, like, based on what we know right now, how we have not even invited the attendance teacher, for example, and that there are a lot of questions around attendance. So we got to make sure we bring that person in somehow, either to be on the team, or they may be a key stakeholder that we need to interview. So it's going to help to, it's almost like a check in your process. How are we doing? Do we have the right people on board? Do we need to kind of think differently? What questions are emerging that we want to track? Really important part of the step, part of the process. And then we get to surveys. This is step 4, right? Most people start surveys step 1, and it's like last year's survey typically. Please don't do that, right? Let's make sure that we have surveys that are thoughtful, that are responsive to the realities as we know them now, based on the first 3 steps that we just pulled together, right? And it's important that we are looking at minimum, at students if we can, at older kids typically can do surveys, parents, families, and teachers, right? Like, that's required. Doesn't mean you can't get other people engaged, but if you're going to be doing this work, we at least need to know what those constituent groups are seeing and thinking, and get their responses in here, administer them, and compile the results. Surveys are a great tool for getting lots of information getting information from lots of people, little bits of information from lots of people. I want to be clear about that. That's why it's not the panacea that people often think it is. Because you get yes, no, 1 through 5, prioritize these in a list or whatever. That's good stuff. You can really use that. But the nuance of understanding why things are the way they are, you're never going to get that from a survey, right? So that's why it's part of the process. It does not begin or end there. Once you've done it, though, then you can start getting other voices to help you unpack what you're learning, right? We saw this thing come up in the survey. We're not sure what it means. We wanted to interview you to get some more insights from you, right? Now you're sort of walking into an interview with one or a small group of people, but you have a real clear agenda about what you're trying to uncover, instead of just like, we're going to have a blank canvas conversation about every possible change or need or whatever that's going on. That's a nice conversation to have, but it's not really going to lead to action in the same way. So it's so important to have this kind of process in place, I think. And then you can get to focus groups. A lot of times folks want to go straight to focus groups. And honestly, it is in the name of the process and of the step. Focus groups need focus. It cannot be this blue sky conversation where you're just talking about everything under the sun. It should be clear, we've done these 3 or 4 things already. We're excited about this. Are you excited about that? We're concerned about this. Is that a concern for you? We're confused about what this means. What do you think that means, right? That's a focused conversation. Obviously, you want to get multiple voices involved in your focus groups. And again, as you go forward, your group is going to help you figure out who those should be and have relationships to be leveraged here. But this comes pretty far down in the process for a reason. Because at that point, you should be really clear about what it is, like what are the long form kinds of questions that you want to ask of your population. You've done your homework. You're ready for that conversation now instead of starting there, right? Is that making sense? Great. And then finally, you get to the last part of the last stage of analysis is going back to your advisory council and pulling together everything you've learned and try to make sense out of it. Like what priorities are emerging here? What trends do we see? What are those burning, sinking issues? It becomes a really important part of making sure you've heard from the group that's seen every step of the process, right? They've been there from the very beginning. And come up with some recommendations. Here's what we think we should be doing going forward. And then reporting. Now, I have seen a lot of people do needs assessments and they create reports that are like phone books. And they include every single piece of information you could imagine. Can you guess how many people want to read that document? Not many people do. Some people do. Lensis wants to read it, but she's the only one, I think. There aren't many people like that. And honestly, if we're thinking again about giving information back to the populations that we've engaged in this work, it's kind of unfair to be like, oh, we uncovered all this great knowledge. You just have to read just you and 500 pages and you'll uncover it. Like, that's kind of crazy, right? So my recommendation on this, our recommendation is that you try to sort of approach this in a more of an outline kind of a form. Like bullets, I feel like, are much more compelling to read through and understand and help you sort of get to some truth than paragraphs and paragraphs of prose, right? Charts help. Some of the survey responses, just to kind of hear directly. I'm glad we have some bullet fans in the room. That the easier it is to understand what it is that we learned, the more likely you are to use that information in developing what action will look like, right? But if you have to read the thing, it just never happens. And not enough people are kind of rallying around the information that's there. Charts are cool. I definitely believe in charts. I think it helps. I want to just make sure that, however, I want to be clear, it's not a here's what the survey said. I think you want to definitely, if there's some really compelling data points, it's good to have those in charts. But part of what this report is sharing with the world is here's our analysis, right? Here's who was involved in the analysis. Here's what we think is going on here. If we're just kind of giving people more information and let them do the interpretation without understanding that you've already done some of that, then you're not really helping them understand what action might look like. You still want to keep things open and say, like, that's how we interpret it, but you might have a different sense of it, and we'd love to hear what that is. I'm not saying it should be closed. But I think, honestly, you've now done a process where you've landed on some ideas. We should share what those ideas are. Because later, when you start saying, we're going to do this thing and not that thing, now people know why, right? So it becomes a really important engagement tool in that regard. Okay, and there's an outline that you can look at. It really, I think, is, this is what needs to be in it. Less is more. Less is more in this case. Okay, so here's like a pretty aggressive phasing for this, right? Here are the 8 steps I talked about. If you were gonna really commit to this and wanted to get it done as quickly as possible, every single step, we think you can get it all done in about 12 weeks. Now, do you have to do every single step exactly the way that we talk about it here? No. It may be that you're already a third of the way in and are stuck, or maybe you started with some surveys and you want to kind of maybe redo them, so it might take a little bit longer. So, it's really presented here as a guideline, not a guideline. Like, you will figure out the best way to make this thing happen. But if you did really wanted to adhere to as it was designed, we think that a pretty aggressive time frame would be about 12 weeks. And that's a lot. I mean, especially with all that's going on here. I'm not sure any school is in a position to do this so quickly. But again, having lots of people engaged is going to mean that you have to identify times to meet, you know, figure out the right cadence of meetings and all that. So that does take some time. Let me wrap this up with a few lessons learned, and then I want to maybe get to some people's questions here, as many as we possibly can, and we can keep the conversation going outside of this workshop as well, of course. First one is, this is as I said before, it's not an individual sport. You got to get a team in place, people you trust, people who will challenge you, people whose voices often aren't heard. That's who you want to be a part of this team. We want to bring focus to focus groups, as I mentioned. And this is what that flow looks like, right? The archival data, then some initial analysis, then we get to focus groups and interviews, then final analysis, and then reporting. Like, there is a sequence here, right? Beware analysis paralysis. I'm sure we're all familiar with this. We want to, we'll just do one more survey, or we have to read one more thing before we decide what we're going to do. Like, the worst thing from not having a needs assessment, the worst thing to that is to have one that's never finished and you do nothing with. Now you've wasted people's time, right? So if you're going to commit to it, let's get to it. And even look, this is not a research study. We're not proving anything here. We want to improve things here. And the standard for that is a little bit lower, right? Enough information to know that we're acting in a way that's thoughtful and we think it's going to make a difference. And the needs assessment can help sort of give you that level of information. Be sure to give and receive, right? So if we're going to get information from people, we give it back in a way that's thoughtful, that's celebratory, that thanks them for being a part of it. And then wash, rinse, repeat. This, as I said in the beginning of this workshop, if you think that your needs assessment you did 2 years ago is still valid, it is not. One that was done a year ago is not valid. So much has happened, so much has changed. It is time to rethink and better understand what the experience is for our kids, our families, our adults in buildings, you know, the community itself. We have to kind of make sure that we understand what's happening now and are positioning our resources in a way that's directly responsive to that. Let me open it up. So unmute yourselves. Let's ask questions, not just to me. As I said, I'm not the expert here. We have lots of experts here who've done this work before, and I'm sure we can help each other out. So questions, thoughts, reactions, snide remarks, I'll take it all.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. I actually put a question in the chat box before you had asked folks to unmute, so I'm just going to ask what I put in the chat box.
Great.
At the end of the presentation, you had said that we should be, doing needs assessments. We can't rely on one from 2 years ago, even from 1 year ago, because needs are constantly changing. So given that the process that you reviewed or presented takes roughly around 12 weeks, how often then should we be revisiting? And when we are revisiting, are we doing the whole process, or what would your recommendation be?
Yeah, great question. And the reason why I'm being emphatic about like 1 year, 2 years is because of what's just happened with the pandemic. And so, people who did it literally a year ago, like a month later, all of that has been invalidated or changed pretty drastically, right? So it's really more comment about that. I recognize that this takes time, right? And effort, and everyone already has full-time jobs. So, no one's sort of waiting for the next need assessment per se. It's the kind of a thing that I think I'm sorry that I forgot her name, but the woman who said earlier that they have this platform that is meeting bi-weekly, like you're going to know as a school community, as a leadership team, when it's time to kind of redo this, because you're going to hear about stories that are showing up about kids who were completely off your radar. Or there's going to be rumblings of stuff that is making people feel uneasy, or missed opportunities, or, in some cases, actually, it's funny, there are people who have realized that they were out of touch because they were going after some money. An RFP shows up and they want to start getting their thoughts on paper. And enough people are just like, you're crazy if you think that's going to work. Like, here's what's really going on in our community, and I can't believe you're not aware of it, right? So there are those kinds of moments that you really want to be paying attention to. and bringing to your leadership team and maybe say like, look, folks, I know we did this 6 months ago, or we did it 2 years ago, whatever the time frame is. I think it's time to do it again. And you're right. Maybe it's not the entire process. Maybe it's like, you know, our survey failed to capture this particular question, or this entire subpopulation of people did not respond. That's not their fault. That's our fault. Like, how do we do this differently so we can get more information and make sure that our planning has their ideas and their needs in mind? So yeah, honestly, I don't have a hard, fast answer except to say, trust your process, trust your people, right? Get those people looking at this and being engaged. And I think the best way forward is going to emerge. But ignoring it, I can guarantee you, it will be way too long.
Thank you.
Great question. Yeah, excellent question. Other questions, reactions, thoughts? Is this helpful? Anyone want to commit to doing this?
I would add to what you said and what to Christine. Don't wait for your system to be broken to start working on it. Like review what you have from previous years and make sure that it's working. And like you both said, maybe you don't have to do the entire assessment, but maybe a simple assessment once in a while. Again, not to wait for the system to be broken to start fixing it, because then you're gonna have a lot of work. And maybe the work that you put into it is what's gonna drive you, like, I don't want to use the word crazy, but it's the one that's gonna give you stress. And so that's when you start hating the data, because you waited too long to get to this data.
Well said, Lindsay. Thank you. Excellent.
All right.
Anyone else? We have like another minute or so. Any parting thoughts, words of advice for people who've done this before or a version of it, or any lingering questions that you want to float up for us all to think about as we go forward here?
I do have one.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, like we in Boston are going to be putting new community school directors into schools that are kind of just beginning this work. When is it worth, obviously I think like we'd want this to be one of the first things they do, but with thinking about the trust piece of it, like when is it worthwhile to spend 12 weeks working on this? Do you need to, would it be once the person has learned the community? Or did you give it your best shot and, you know, leverage the folks who do know the community better right from the beginning of the school year?
Excellent question. Hard to give like an overarching answer to that.
Sure.
Except that I will say this, that I have seen too many examples where people have started either a brand new community school or there's a new community school coordinator, and they have missed the opportunity to clarify what their role is and what a community school is by letting too much time lapse before they start talking about this stuff, right? This process is at one time, like with one process, you end up engaging multiple audiences. You end up understanding what our current architecture of data looks like in a school community. You end up engaging, hopefully, voices of people who have not been invited to do the kinds of thoughtful planning that you need for this work. And in all of that, you are building trust. Because you're asking people for information because you're like, look, I'm new here. I'm trying to learn and I need to learn from you. That is actually one way to build trust pretty quickly, is to let people know, like, I value your opinion, right? And I'm being authentic about this. I'm not just asking you because I need to check off a box. So I would say that it's a great way to get things to move quickly. And at the end of it, by the way, at the end of it, you now have also, and we've seen many examples of this, where the group that came together, that ad hoc group that came together to do the needs assessment, now basically becomes the leadership team of the school. They get added to the existing structure, or they create one or kind of rekindle one. And now you have a group that was there for that entire process who is not ignoring the burning sinking stuff, because they were watching, they were really studying what's going on here. And now you have a team, right? So I think that's a great way to start a newish relationship or new initiative in a school, or for someone who's new to it to say, look, it would be irresponsible of me to say that I understand what's going on here. I just got here. It's impossible. I don't even know where the bathrooms are. So let's figure out together the best way to understand not just what I need to know, but what we need to do collectively to move to where we all want to go. So I highly, highly encourage folks to think about bringing this into their process. And now I think the opportunity of, no one really knows what's going on anymore. This is really an important time for people to be thoughtful about what the needs are, and beyond like the stuff that is on. This is going to sort of contradict a little bit what I said earlier. There are things that are like on fire that of course you need to take care of, but the things that aren't really on fire there are things that are not on fire that are also important, right? And so yes, we have to make sure that we are getting food to families and tech devices to families in cases where that's kind of the issue. But we're not done once we deliver food and tech, right? There's other stuff going on for kids and families that we don't want to ignore. So what are those? And at this stage in the process, in this stage of the pandemic, we should be thinking about some of the longer tail kinds of issues that maybe we didn't have the capacity before to identify and address, but maybe now we're starting to. I hope that's helpful.
Yes, thank you.
All right, we are over time, but I want to do my best to track what we have in the chat here and see if we can maybe add some responses to the page and hub. You were all terrific. Thank you all so much for the great questions. I'm really hopeful that you will find an opportunity to look at the toolkit more closely. And if you have suggestions for making it stronger, we are really open to that. So, try things out, or even based on what you see there, if there's language that doesn't sort of land the right way for you, I'm really open to getting that feedback. So thank you all so much. I think our next session is, I'm not even going to say a time because I don't have it in front of me. I don't want to confuse anybody, but you all should look at your hub and make sure that you are in the right place at the right time. Because one more session today, and then after today, we will, after that, we'll pick it up again tomorrow. Okay. Thank you all so much. Appreciate it. Thanks for what you do.
Thank you.